My name is Jonah Jonathan, and today I've had the unique opportunity of interviewing jazz alto saxophonist David Binney. David Binney came to New York 30 years ago, and he's had the great opportunity of studying with Phil Woods, George Coleman, and Dave Liebman, among others. I really think that this interview is important to what I'm doing in my series because David was here 30 years ago and he's here now, and he has a great understanding of what's changed on the scene and how things used to be and how things are and how they will be. So this interview is really important. I do want to forewarn you that we did this outside and it was near a crowded area, so there is some background noise. However, there was a microphone and David is picked up loud and clear, so you guys should be able to hear that. So without further ado, let's get to the interviews. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I have the unique opportunity of interviewing alto saxophonist and composer David Binney. Now, David, could you tell people who aren't familiar with your work, could you tell us about your coming to New York and how you got started in jazz in New York?
Sure, yeah, well, I grew up in California, and I graduated high school and didn't want to stay in LA at the time, and I just moved to New York and decided to just study privately with some of my favorite players that I was listening to at the time. And
who are some of those cats that you
I studied with Dave Liebman, I studied with George Coleman, I studied with Phil Woods, Bob Mincer.
So when you first came here, you had a unique opportunity to be able to study with some really great names. Would something like that be possible nowadays, do you think? What do you think has changed that doesn't allow for that mentorship to happen like it did back in the day?
Well, I'm not sure if it's changed. The mentorship has changed. I don't know. I feel like that can still happen. When I moved here, I just took lessons. You know, I called people and took lessons, and you know, people like Liebman especially kind of, you know, really helped me out. But I think that, and I feel like I do that for a lot of the students that I have now. So I don't know if that's changed much. Okay. You know.
So when you were here, did you attend any school, or was it really just private?
Just private. I decided to come here for a year, and if I didn't like it, I would go to school or, you know, whatever.
So obviously you liked it, and things were working out for you.
Yeah, I liked it. Yeah, it was what I wanted, and it all worked out. I worked day jobs for 10 years though before. I mean, I kind of worked a few jobs, but I worked day jobs for 10 years before I really started making my living in music.
Okay, and tell us a little bit about your early musical career here in New York. What year did you come here?
I came here in 1981, and when it was a completely different city.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting time.
Yeah, it was an interesting time. I worked, like I said, I worked day jobs. I tried to get little gigs. I went to jam sessions. There were a lot of jam sessions then. I went to Jazz Forum and Jazz Mania and all these places that you probably never heard of. And you know, just met people, and then, you know, started to play some little gigs around, but still I made my living with day jobs. And then I got in all kinds of different scenes, the blues scene, eventually, like in the 90s, blues scene, rock scene, funk, you know, like weddings, tons of weddings, like I did every kind of gig I could do, you know.
Well, could you tell us about when your real professional career began? How did that come about? Like, did you start? When did you start coming out with recordings and working heavily?
Well, I got a grant from the National Endowment of the Arts just for $3,000. It wasn't much, and it was just sort of on a last-minute whim. But I decided to make a record with that, and back then I kind of, you know, called some people I had been listening to, and I made a record. And then Liebman actually helped me get it on a label in France, and you know, things.
What was that?
It was called Point Game.
Point Game.
And it from that it just sort of started. You know, it just sort of started, and I did a tour in Europe, and because of that record, and I got into some other bands. We started this band called Lost Tribe that was pretty popular with Adam Rogers and Ben Porowski and David Gilmour, and just did a bunch of, you know, stuff like that, and just kept trying to tour, and it just kept building and building. And then I kept getting little record deals, you know.
That's a unique opportunity, but for now, I mean, back then, it seemed like there was a lot more opportunity to be able to do something. Nowadays, younger cats, it's just really hard to even come out with a record or find gigs or even make things happen.
Well,
in your personal observation, what's really changed?
I mean, it's changed a lot. I think it's always been hard. Being an artist is hard. It's always been hard. In every era, it's been difficult. In every era, it's been a struggle for people. It's still a struggle. It's a different kind of struggle now because the parameters have changed. But it was hard when I got here. It was hard when, you know, Charlie Parker got here. It was hard before that, and it was hard. You know, it's always been hard. I think that now what's changed is, you know, there's no record industry, so people don't get signed and then have record deals and whatever. But, you know, you never made any money from records anyway. I only started making a little bit of money from records when I kind of started putting them out on my own label. So in a way, it wasn't a financial thing. It was just that you had an outlet. But we do have an outlet now anyway, because we can make our own records. And there's a medium, you know, the internet, that you can spread what you do everywhere. So it's a weird time because there's a lot more access to the rest of the world for what you do. There's just a lot more people doing it. So there's a lot more competition. There's the sideman thing in jazz is kind of, you know, over, and the touring thing has changed because of economic reasons. The touring thing in jazz is changing, and that's become harder. But I think, you know, what's happening is a lot of younger people are looking for sort of conventional things to keep them going. What's always kept people in the jazz world going, and that's not really happening anymore. But there are a lot of other things that are. So, I don't know. I think it has to go back a little bit to people being inventive in the way they work, to creating their own scene. I think it's just a time of transition, but it's not. I don't think it's a bad time. I just think it's a time of transition. I think young musicians have to think about new ways to make a living. You know? Yeah, and I don't think it's not that it's not possible. I think people now they go to school, they graduate, they get a degree, they kind of expect like, oh, I should be working when I get it. See, when I was coming up, that didn't really exist. So we knew that it was already going to be just a life of kind of torture and hard. Now people expect it to be a life of like, I went to school and got a degree and I should work. But it's never been like that, and it never will be. So it's I think part of the problem is in the expectation of the young musician. It's never been easy. It's never, and you know, I don't think it's, I mean, it's definitely hard now. It's hard for everyone. It's also hard for everyone in every other field. It's economically, it's bad. But I don't know. Do you
think, at least in my experience, do you think that jazz schools actually have some part in playing with this kind of fantasy that you'll find work as soon as you finish school, and that the degree is really required to make it happen on the scene? At least that's kind of the words that I've heard from my teachers, but I don't know what your opinion is on that.
Yeah, I think that's the problem is that it's been institutionalized and to the point where it's become like it's a job. It's not a job. I mean, it never has been. Being an artist is not. It's a job if you get good enough and you luck out to be able to get paid for it. But it's not a job that you go into school for and graduate and go get hired. That's not the way it works. It may work that way for a minute, like you may get some kind of gig, but it's not that way. You don't so I think that is part of the problem, definitely. At the same time, because there are so many musicians or ex-musicians or wannabe musicians or whatever, the school thing has become an economic source for them, the teachers. I mean, so they have a vested interest in getting a lot of people in school because that's how they make their living. Maybe they couldn't make it as a jazz musician or a musician. Maybe they did and they don't want to travel anymore. Whatever the reason is, and I've been hired by universities and everything too, and I kind of like it actually. But it's part of the problem is that it's very comfortable to get a cushy university gig and then have all these, but without the students you can't have that gig. So there's a lot of musicians who are doing that because there's not much work, so a lot of people teach. So there's there's blame to be had by and you could say that about the musicians, even the more established musicians or convincing the young people that they should go to school and study with them.
Yeah, I mean it's a really complicated dilemma because what I see happening is that cats like myself go through school and then automatically become attracted to doing the college educational scene because that's where the money is. And the reason that there's money there is because it's built almost on a half-truth, a lie that when you finish school, after going here, you'll definitely find work and you'll definitely make it on the scene. So I guess that's something that has become a problem here in New York. And do you have any suggestions of how that could be fixed?
Well, first of all, I mean, that is true, but that's also true of a lot of other fields. So it's not unique to the jazz thing. I mean, there's been art history majors for years. There's been, all kinds of, all kinds of fields in universities that don't even have anything to do with art that really, when you get out, I mean, philosophy, philosophical studies, I mean, really, there's nothing to do. When you get out, you teach. I mean, well, that's not that much different than what's happened to the jazz world. It's just that the jazz world is new to being institutionalized. It's a new thing. It's not new in the philosophy world. It's not new in other arts actually. But I think that how to fix it. I mean, I don't know. I'm just a believer that if you are an artist and you really love what you do and you just do it. And you suffer through whatever it is you suffer through, and you kind of put blinders on, and you don't concern yourself with, trying to make it into a job, and and you don't think about, I got a degree, and this is, that's only supposed to help you, with the technique of it all, but. I think a lot of it has to do with the musicians. It goes deep. I think a lot of it has to do with the era. I think a lot of it has to do with young people today and this recent generation who grew up with a lot of wealth. A lot of things were easy. There was basically no war, or not much. I mean, when Clinton was in the 90s. I mean, when a lot of people came up, it was like the biggest economic boom of all time. So people got used to having money around. So now there's not, and now people are. So I think a lot of the blame has to be laid on society as a whole, and the way things have gone, and the way we've given young people everything. So now that when there's not everything, people think it's super hard, and things have changed, and things haven't changed that much. It's just we're coming out of an economic boom, and it's hard for everybody.
Yeah, the young people are really the now generation.
Exactly. I mean, they think they deserve. I mean, the students I have some great students, but there's a lot of students that come to me. They think they deserve, to work. Like I didn't. In my era, which is not that much long ago, that's not the way we thought. We knew it was going to be hard. We knew it was a privileged thing, and that you had to be really good and you had to suffer to get to where you are. I mean, that's just sort of the way it is. I mean, because it's not, especially what we do, is not that popular. You're talking about, you know, most of these people walking by here, they don't know what the hell we do. They have no idea, and they don't care. They don't care. They don't care if I'm a good saxophone player or what. They don't care. One out of every, 150 maybe go, oh yeah, I like jazz.
Yeah, it's really jazz has really become a niche genre.
It's always been. I mean, Charlie Parker was playing in the 55 bar basically. I mean, that's what Birdland. I mean, it was all. Coltrane was playing in the same, clubs with people talking, and it's never any different. We just, with time, we blow this up as these people are these iconic people, and that it's just some great thing, which it is. But it still, in its day, was appreciated about as much as it is now. So, a lot of the people that we idolize never made any money in their life, including, that's the classical world. I can go down stories with Bartok, Charles Ives, I mean, people who, never really made much money from their art. So, to fix it, I don't know. I think there's no fix. I think it's just that you do what you do, and you try to, you do anything in, it's the capitalist thing, but you do something well and you create a demand for it, you have a career. That's it.
Now moving on, I wanted to speak about the New York scene on a whole, the New York City scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we were speaking a few nights back. You were talking about it's gotten really bad, and they're even thinking of moving away. Could you speak to us about your opinion on what's going on and what's making it difficult for you as a musician?
Well, I don't think that, I mean, when I was saying moving away, I was just thinking about, I'm from LA, and I see kind of a new scene sort of coming up there, and I sort of want to be part of it as an older generation. I also am getting into some other kinds of music, which is bigger in LA than it is here. So my moving away wouldn't be necessarily because of what's going on here. I still do fine here, and I'm touring and producing records and whatever. That's fine. I think that the economic thing in the jazz world, because of the economies in Europe, which is where we've made our money in New York, basically for years, those are slowing down. They're favoring European musicians a lot, and there are a lot of good European musicians now. So they create their own scenes. There's a lot of that, so it becomes harder for us, so we have to adjust. We have to come up with another, that's what I'm saying, we have to come up with another way. There are other ways, I think, like I said, the internet, I mean, YouTube, as you were talking about before, but I don't think, what I see as more of a problem, there's not that much of a problem for me, what I see as more of a problem, especially with the younger generation, is that there's so many musicians here now, coming from so many places, because everybody comes here, and they expect to be working, that what I see is these camps happening and these scenes, and I see a lot of sort of kind of infighting, and I see a racial divide that I haven't seen in a long time, and which is really kind of ugly and not cool at all. But and I don't want any part of that. I never did, and I just sort of ignore it. But I see the young people, a lot of young people being a certain way, and I think it's naive, and I think it's backwards too, and it's just repeating a past. And they're young, so they don't even understand what they're doing. But it's repeating something that's already happened, and But I think there's a lot of things to blame there, and ways to, we could go into that. But I think that's detrimental to the scene. Sure. But in any economic crisis in anything in the world, when people are fighting for money and there's too many people fighting for it, there's a lot of infighting, there's a lot of separation, there's a lot of, and that's happening in the jazz world, as it is in all the other professions at the moment. I mean, I've talked to a lot of other people in other professions. So we're talking about something that's happening everywhere, but since we're talking about jazz, we can address that, and that's definitely happening in this scene, you know.
Sure. You know, I guess one other question to ask you before we move on. A lot of young musicians are doing things for very little money, for free, and for tips, and letting the club owners essentially, club owners, restaurant owners, what you have it, take people and use them for free. What do you have to say to that, and what should young musicians do in order to stand up for themselves in these kind of situations?
Well, that's definitely a problem, you know, because music on every level has essentially become free, which, you know, there's a whole theory about that, about information in general being inherently free. I want to make sure I didn't turn this off. But, you know, I still think it comes down to, I mean, you know, a lot of the musicians who are doing those gigs, I mean, you're talking about, you know, doing restaurant gigs, you're talking about doing these little gigs, playing for free, tips. That is part of coming up, that is part of learning to some extent. It does hurt the scene ultimately, but I still think that if you do something original and strong, and you do it well, you eventually are going to get paid for it, because people, if it's you create a demand, people will pay for it. If you're just playing background music at a restaurant, you know, I mean, that's always been cheap work, you know. Nowadays, yeah, there's a lot of places you play for free. People give their records away for free. I think that's just, you know, why do that? I mean, why people go, I want to be on a label. It's just, you know, if you're going to put out a record, which I don't think people, that's another thing. I think young people put out records way too early now. They're not really ready, and then they're exposed to all these critics and stuff, and the critics listen to the record and go, I don't like this. Next time they come out with a record, the critic immediately just throws it into the trash. So I think, you know, if you're going to come out with a record, be damn sure that it's pretty good, and you're going to get some attention. But, you know, I think it just comes about, still about being original, not only in what you create, but how you present it, and in what way you present it. You can completely bypass, I mean, if I was a young musician now, I'd probably do what I did, is I decided to get day jobs rather than do, you know, early on, do like just wedding gigs, play in the street. I did play in the street for a couple of years, but I stopped doing it. I was really, what am I doing? Let me just work at a job, and then on the side create my own thing and develop that, and then present that, and make that a strong thing, and make it different from something you could hear in every other place. Not just playing standards, not play, you know, that's the other thing. I go to Fat Cat or something late at night, and all these people are at school, and they're being told that, you know, they have to learn all these standards and learn how to play a certain style. But, you know, that's a really good background. We all studied that way. And we've all studied, you know, I've studied endless, but to stay there and think that that's the end all is killing a lot of musicians. There's most of the musicians, like all those young people I see at Fat Cat, they're never going to get out of that. That's it. There's no place to go other than Fat Cat, you know, I mean, at a session to play for free, to play those tunes, and for what? You know, for people playing ping pong? I mean, you got to be more original than that.
Yeah, I mean, the original cats, Bird, Dizzy, Coltrane, Miles, all of them were actually coming out with their own tunes, which have now become standards in a sense, and that becomes a problem. And it seems though, from listening to your records and the music that you've been making, it's really unique and some of my favorite stuff to listen to, because it's just new and it's something different. I guess, could you speak to us about how you made your niche, and how you came about playing with some great musicians such as, you know, Chris Potter, Lee Kranz?
Well,
tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to the thing, I mean, Charlie Parker, Louis Armstrong, you know, all those guys were trying to do something new and fresh. That's the whole point. They weren't trying to be just do what their forefathers had done, or mothers. You know, they were trying to do something new, and I mean, a lot of the young musicians now are not trying to do that because of school and because they're told they have to do this, and then it becomes a competition. It becomes a macho thing. Who knows the most tunes? Who can play the most, like, you know, Sonny Stitt or something. You know, it's like, who cares? I mean, you know, Sonny Stitt did it better than any of them are ever going to do it. So why even just take that and further it along? But I mean, I've always had that mentality, and I think, I mean, I know that the great people that you just mentioned all had that mentality. You know, and for me, again, I just wrote music. You know, the people that you mentioned, I mean, also are my friends, you know, and they're my peers, the people that I came up playing with. So, you know, I put these bands together where people go, man, you have this like all-star band. It's like, yeah, I do, but I also have, these are the guys I came up playing with. I mean, they're from my generation in a way, and we have like-minded things, and this is how that happens. But I think it really just, it comes from what you do individually on your own, when you're alone, you know, in your apartment, when you're practicing, when you're writing. Be original practicing, be original writing, be original in the way you present it. Make sure that what you're doing is sort of, you know, pushing a little bit, and so that people are interested. Because these people, I mean, people are open. They want to hear something that's new. I mean, you know, they just do. That's the nature of, I mean, humanity. Kind of, most people, especially this country, want to push things along. Yeah. And you know, they just, you know, there's an audience of people that want to hear stuff that's been done before. There always will be. You know, the Lincoln Center thing has become, you know, that it's become institutionalized and classicalized to like classical music. Jazz is old enough now to become what classical music has been. You know, there's a camp of people who play Beethoven and Bach and all that stuff, all that great stuff, and then there's a camp of like new musicians who play new music, and you know, and those camps kind of coexist and don't meet much until later on. And you know, the whole Winton thing and the Lincoln Center thing, you know, jazz has been going long enough for that to turn into a classical music. So now there's like this camp thing, and there's arguments between the camp, which is ridiculous. I mean, there should be something like that honors the history and whatever, but that's not the end. That's not where music has to, you know, jazz has to stay. It shouldn't stay there. And the people that they're playing there would never, you know, think that it should stay there. You know. Yeah. So, you know, but I think you just have to be, again, just do something, you know, be original, do something. Don't expect other people to do it for you. Don't expect gigs to just come along. You have to create it. You have to create the opportunities. Also, I think young musicians should go out and find their own venues. I mean, that's what I did when I used to walk around the Upper West Side and go into places that I saw weren't maybe that busy, that had an empty corner. Say, you know, let's, why don't you have some music here? Like, you know, that's what, you know, Knitting Factory started like that. The old one, you know, they were two guys who just came from Wisconsin or whatever, and started a club, and musicians came by and said, you know, you should have music there. And it started, and the musicians that just so happened to go by and do that ended up being, you know, Zorn and Bill Frisell and Steve Coleman, and yeah, and then it became super popular, and it grew and grew and grew, and it became, you know, and that was just people going out and creating for themselves, musicians creating the scene. They weren't waiting for anybody. They went out and created the scene. And you know, Steve Coleman with M-Bass and all that stuff. I mean, he created a thing. He said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to create a group of people that does this. I'm going to call it this. He was brilliant at that, you know, and that's what people have to do. You can't go to school and get a degree and expect to. That's not. Sure. That doesn't happen.
Well, thank you so much. Just the last question for
sure.
Everyone. Where do you see jazz going in the next 20, 30 years? Where do you see the music going? Where do you think it's heading? Where would you like it to head?
Well, I'd like it to head wherever anybody wants to take it, you know, but I think it's already, you know, in a lot of places that people don't think about. I mean, one of the best sort of improvised concerts I went to the Bowery Ballroom about 6 or 7 years ago and saw 3 bands, 2 of them, one being Battles, which is Ty Braxton's band with a couple of people, Ty Braxton being Anthony Braxton's son. It's like an instrumental rock band that improvises. And Prefuse 73, who's an electronica DJ guy. And he had 2 drummers, and, you know, the guys were, you know, it was this kind of new thing. And it was all instrumental music, and they were improvising, like heavily listening to each other and improvising. It wasn't some, you know, set thing at all. They were improvising, and the place was packed with young people dancing, and the stuff wasn't even, there was odd time signatures, everything, but people were freaking out. And I looked at that and I said, you know, this is way more jazz than these things that I go to see where people are playing standards and just regurgitating licks and doing. This is like something new. It's improvisatory, it's difficult, it's all the things, but the jazz world basically would not even consider it jazz, but it's improvising, which, I mean, you know, I mean, I guess it depends on how you define jazz, but, you know, it grooved, I mean, hard, you know, I mean, as does swing, as does funk, as does everything. Groove is groove to me. So I don't know. I think it's everywhere, and people don't even know it. You know, there's like all this stuff happening. There's a lot of great music I listen to, from rock bands, everything, that is improvisatory and really happening. You know.
Well, David, thanks so much for speaking to us. Where can people check you out? Website?
Yeah, you know, davidbinney.com. There's all kinds of stuff up there. A lot of live gigs, a lot of records, schedule, you know, all that. So, the usual.
Great.
You know.
Well, thank you. Take care. And guys, check out this real legend.